right, let's jump into something completely different this time.
Oh, I love differential.
Who doesn't?
Oh.
Right. We're heading to Cologne, Germany.
Nice.
But not the Cologne you'd see on a postcard.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
We're going deep into the world of football hooliganism.
Right.
Through this, honestly, pretty intense autobiography by a guy named Biniak. What makes this deep dive so fascinating is that Biniak doesn't just tell us about fights.
Right.
He weaves in the whole history and soul of Cologne into his story. You get the local pride, those fierce rivalries, the evolution of fan culture, you name it.
It's like a crash course in Cologne, but with, well, a lot more brawling than your average travel guide.
Exactly. It's this crazy mix of memoir, love letter to Cologne, and gotta be honest, some parts are kind of unsettling. Like, you get these glimpses of what fandom was like before the internet.
Interesting.
And then there's this whole thing about strict codes of conduct amidst all the chaos.
Okay.
And Biniak's own transformation from this kid who was picked on to, well, someone who sought respect through fighting. So
sounds like a complicated journey.
yeah, definitely a complicated journey. And that's actually where we'll start with Cologne itself.
Makes sense.
Biniak's connection to his city is deep, like seriously deep. Born there, writes with this thick Cologne dialect, even throws in local songs and sayings.
Wow. So it's not just his story, it's like Cologne's story too.
Exactly. It's like he's saying Cologne's history kind of predestined him for this life.
Interesting.
He even links hooliganism all the way back to the city's Roman roots.
The Romans, really?
Yeah. Says the ancient street layout, like how the streets were built, influenced how they'd fight rivals.
So hooliganism as urban planning.
Well, he doesn't put it quite like that, but you get the idea.
I think so, though I'm not sure the Romans would approve.
Probably not.
But what about that whole carnival thing? Isn't that a big deal in Cologne?
Oh yeah, huge. And he compares the rebellious spirit of carnival to the energy of those fan clashes. So
it's like this wild streak that's woven into the city itself.
that's exactly what he seems to be saying.
I see. And then what about the Rhine? I mean, that's got to play a role, right?
Oh, absolutely. The Rhine River is a constant theme for him.
Figured as much.
He uses it not just for Cologne's beauty, but for the, currents of conflict that run through the city and through his own life.
That's pretty poetic, actually, especially for someone who's also describing, well, brawls and stuff.
Right. It's this weird mix of the beautiful and the brutal. But okay, let's move on to the actual hooliganism part.
Okay, let's do it.
What surprised me about Biniak's early days wasn't the chaos.
Yeah.
It was the organization. He talks about pre-fight routines and strategies that honestly make them sound more like a sports team than some random mob.
Seriously, they had, like, game plans.
Yep, pretty much. Like they were prepping for a match.
That's wild. So much for the image of drunken brawls breaking out randomly.
Right. And then there's this one scene, it's terrifying and oddly touching at the same time. Biniak and his friend, Deegan, they're holding hands amidst all the tension before this massive brawl.
Holding hands.
Yeah, and then they charge in together. It's I don't know, kind of said something about the bonds they formed.
Yeah, it really does. Like, you don't hold hands with someone you don't trust.
Exactly. And for Biniak, you can tell this was his path to, I guess, the respect he wanted after being bullied as a kid.
So it wasn't just about the violence, it was about finding a place to belong.
Yeah, I think so. But like anything, hooliganism was always changing.
Of course, things never stay the same.
He describes this shift from, get this, the era of LSD trips on the Dom Plath, that's that big square in Cologne by the cathedral, to like the rise of techno music and this club called Warehouse.
Okay, that's a big jump from LSD to techno. So it wasn't just about brawling anymore, it was tied to these evolving subcultures.
Exactly. And Warehouse becomes this like microcosm of the changing time.
I can imagine.
It wasn't just a place to party, it was where these subcultures collided. And eventually, even Biniak starts feeling disillusioned with the scene, kind of mirroring the decline of Warehouse itself after this big police raid.
So it's like a whole chapter of his life and of Cologne's underground closes.
Yeah, it's like a whole era ends. And there's even a period where he gets deep into drug dealing.
Wow, so he was really in the thick of it.
Big time. But what I found interesting was, even though his parents obviously didn't approve, their loyalty never wavered.
That's powerful. It reminds you that these aren't just, faceless figures. They have families, they have lives.
Right, it humanizes him.
Oh.
But you can't talk Cologne hooliganism without those rivalries.
Oh, yeah, the rivalries.
And Biniak had plenty.
I bet.
And it wasn't just random violence. These rivalries were, like, deeply tied to the region's geography and identity. You've got what you call the Rhineland Rivalry Quartet, Cologne, Leverkusen, Gladbach, and Düsseldorf.
So it was like a whole football family feud.
Basically, yeah, but a lot more intense.
I can imagine. So were they constantly at each other's throats?
Pretty much. But he describes them like a dysfunctional family.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah, bound by this intense hatred, but also this weird kind of respect.
Huh, that's interesting. Hate and respect all mixed together.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like, he tells a story about being asked to coach young Cologne hooligans for a fight against, get this, Leverkusen.
Wait, hold on. Coaching, as in, like, this was some sort of organized hooligan event?
Pretty much, yeah.
Wow. They really took their fighting seriously.
Oh, totally. And remember all that talk about structure and codes? They approach these fights with a weird level of seriousness.
Right, like they weren't just messing around.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So despite his history with Leverkusen, because, believe it or not, he actually trained at their boxing gym as a kid, Biniak agrees to coach the Cologne crew.
Talk about a conflict of interest. So did he, like, betray his roots and throw the fight?
No way. He leads those Cologne guys to victory. Describes it as, like, sweet revenge for all that historical tension.
Oh, man. I bet the Leverkusen fans were not happy.
Probably not. He even describes how they had to walk back home over this river, the Wupper River.
Adding insult to injury.
Totally. But with all this talk about codes and, organized fights, did he ever, question the point of it all?
It's a good question. Like, did he ever see the hypocrisy in it all?
He does. Admits that, yeah, they justified it as self-defense, but it was often about ego, protecting their reputation.
So it wasn't always as noble as they made it seem?
Not even close. He even lists some of those codes of conduct in the book, things like no attacking women or children, no ganging up, only fighting those who are willing to fight back.
Sounds like they were trying to, I don't know, create some kind of warrior's code.
It's bizarre, right? This attempt to impose order on something that's inherently chaotic.
Yeah, a very twisted version of chivalry. But I bet those codes were broken pretty often.
Oh, absolutely. And sometimes the violence went way beyond anything those codes could contain, like with Schalke.
Ah, Schalke. That rivalry always seemed to be particularly volatile.
Understatement.
Yeah.
What happened at that infamous Nikolaustag brawl he keeps mentioning?
Okay, picture this. Packed stadium, Cologne playing Schalke away, right? And suddenly, a group of Cologne hooligans dressed as Santa Claus storm the stands.
Wait, what? Santa Claus hooligans? Are you serious?
No, I'm dead serious. Santa Claus hooligans.
I don't even know what to say to that.
I know, right? It's like something out of a weird dream. But it gets crazier. So there's an initial clash, more people jump in, and you have this wild chase across the stands. The announcer's pleading for calm over the loudspeaker, and then boom, the riot police arrive. So who wins this epic Santa showdown?
I'm almost afraid to ask.
Biniak admits they were outnumbered and had to retreat, but the fighting kept going even after the police showed up. It shows how intense this rivalry was. And, the whole Santa Claus thing just adds this extra layer of, I don't even know what to call it.
Bizarre. Surreal.
Yeah.
Absurd.
All of the above. Makes you wonder if it was some kind of deliberate provocation, a way to mock authority.
Right. Like, it's not just a brawl, it's a statement.
Exactly. And remember, this was all before social media. These clashes weren't about going viral.
Good point. They were about real-world consequences.
They were making memories, not memes.
Exactly. But Biniak's story, it doesn't end with these local German rivalries. He goes international.
Oh, yeah. Things are about to get even more intense.
Way more intense. He talks about Rotterdam, how he felt like every Dutch grandpa wanted to crack his skull.
Whoa, that's a bit much.
Right. And he compares their police force to a gang, says they seem to enjoy roughing up German supporters.
So it's like stepping into a whole different level of hostility.
Totally. And then there's his near-death experience.
Near-death experience? What happened?
He doesn't go into too much detail, but he describes being caught in this massive crush of bodies at the Feyenoord Stadium.
Oh, wow. That's scary.
Yeah, he thought he was going to die.
Yeah.
Felt like he was suffocating, being trampled underfoot.
It's a good reminder of just how dangerous this world can be.
For sure. And it wasn't just Rotterdam. He's got stories about Brussels, Prague, even a trip to Paris for the World Cup that was soundtracked by, you guessed it, that Carnaval de Paris song.
Of course. That song follows him everywhere.
It's like his own personal hooligan anthem, but not in a good way.
I can imagine. But, even with all the chaos, there are these moments of unexpected humor in his stories.
Yeah, like that snowball fight with the Czech border guards.
Right. It's this weird mix of brutality and absurdity that makes his story so compelling.
Totally. You're both horrified and entertained at the same time.
And honestly, it makes you think about human nature in a pretty uncomfortable way.
Because it's easy to dismiss hooligans as just mindless thugs.
Right. But there's so much more to it than that.
Biniak shows us that these are complex individuals, often driven by this search for identity and belonging.
And that's where things get really interesting. Because as his story unfolds, it becomes less about the external conflicts and more about his own internal struggles.
So let's shift our focus inwards then, and see what we can learn from Biniak's journey about the human need for connection, purpose, and maybe even redemption.
So we followed Biniak from the streets of Cologne to stadiums across Europe, seen the intensity, the darkness of that hooligan world.
Yeah, it's been quite a journey.
Definitely. But his story, it takes a kind of unexpected turn in those later chapters.
You mean when it becomes less about the brawls and more about his own search for meaning?
Exactly. What really struck me was how he reflects on his childhood. Describes himself as this small, skinny kid, long blonde hair, constantly picked on.
Wow, that's a far cry from the image we get through most of the book.
Right. It makes you wonder if that feeling of being powerless kind of fueled his need to prove himself through fighting.
Like he had to overcompensate?
Maybe. He even describes this incident where he has a chance to fight back against these guys who are insulting him.
Okay.
But he hesitates, backs down, and he's furious at himself afterward. Feels like he betrayed his own code.
So that need for validation through violence, it was already there?
Yeah, deeply ingrained. It's like he was trapped in this cycle, always needing to be the strongest one in the room.
But eventually something shifts. He realizes he has to change his life. What was the turning point for him?
I don't think it was just one thing, more like a bunch of factors all coming together, the constant fear of arrest, realizing he's hurting the people he cares about, and a growing disillusionment with the whole scene.
So he was burning out.
Yeah, tired of the violence, tired of the fear, and most importantly, he wanted something more.
He even mentions needing specialized lawyers.
Oh yeah, that's a telling detail.
Shows how deep he was in the legal system. It wasn't just about street fights anymore.
Exactly. He's facing real consequences charges, potential jail time. He had to make a choice. Keep going down that path or find a way out. You can feel that shift in his writing, this genuine desire for something different.
He even gets a tattoo in Serbian, the language of his grandfather, that says, "God protect me and my love."
Wow, that's powerful.
It's like he's breaking free from that tribal mentality and embracing something more individual.
A commitment to change. But even as he tries to move on, you can sense that pull toward his past. He revisits his old haunts, thinks about his family history.
That struggle to reconcile who he was with who he's trying to become.
Yeah. He talks about his grandfather, a Serbian war prisoner who stayed in Germany and embraced Cologne's carnival culture.
So like he's looking for the roots of his own rebellious spirit.
Maybe. He also describes this close bond with his aunt, who he says was full of life, always up for adventure.
So even amidst all that darkness, there were positive influences.
Definitely. And his love for Cologne, that never went away.
Even though he rejects the violence, that connection to his city, his people, it remains.
It's a powerful thing, that sense of belonging. And even as he criticizes hooliganism, he still holds on to certain aspects of it.
Yeah, he talks about the Cologne way of fighting with this weird sense of pride.
It's complex, right? He's repulsed by the violence, but drawn to that sense of community it provided.
It makes you wonder if all that energy, that intensity, could ever be channeled in a different direction.
That's the big question. Imagine if that loyalty, that commitment, was directed towards something positive. What could they achieve?
It's something to think about, not just for Cologne, but for any group struggling with those kinds of divisions.
Absolutely. I think that's what makes Biniak's story so compelling. It's not just about hooliganism, it's about the heart of a city, and maybe the human heart in general.
We saw the dark side, the violence, but also the love, the camaraderie, that search for identity.
And ultimately that potential for change.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. It was certainly an intense one.
Yeah, but really fascinating. Biniak's story, it's messy, challenging, but it definitely leaves you with a lot to think about.
We'll see you next time as we explore another slightly less violent corner of the world.
Slightly less violent would be good.
Agreed. Until then.